Serious Redditors who killed someone in self-defense. What happened? Did you get blamed for it? I was woken up by my fiance telling me that she thinks someone opened the back door, which is always locked. It was a loud door with an even louder screen door that I've never heard anything else sound like. So I told her to lay on the floor and call 911 as I grabbed my handgun from the nightstand. As she was whispering to the operator, I could hear at least one person talking downstairs. It turned out that there were two people. I could hear footsteps slowly coming up the stairs. My fiance set the phone down and I told her to cover her ears. The bedroom door opened and a man was standing in the doorway with something in his hands. I later found out it was a knife. I fired 4 shots, 2 hit the man in the doorway in the chest, 1 hit the second person who was standing near the top of the stairs in the shoulder, and the 4th shattered my toilet down the hall. The police showed up soon after that. The rest of the night was mostly a blur. The guy in the doorway died there, the one I shot in the shoulder lived, and was charged with his burglar buddy's death and a host of other charges. I also remember slipping on the stairs because of the water. I was never blamed for anything. I was asked to go to the station that night to talk to them for a while, but I was able to go with my fiance and not in the back of a cop car. The 911 recording backed up my whole story. I've posted this before in another thread, so apologies if it sounds familiar. I'd been kickboxing competitively for 10 years prior to this incident. I had broken my arm and had a newborn child. I had one arm in a sling and my baby in a carrier that was in my other hand. A guy must have thought I looked like an easy target and pulled a knife on me while I was walking through a relatively quiet alley connecting 2 streets. My only thoughts were of my baby, so I kicked the guy in the thigh hard. He fell over and I followed up with a roundhouse to the side of his head. Only issue was that he had fallen next to a bollard, and when I kicked him his head smashed off it. I don't think I'll ever forget the noise his head made when it hit off the bollard, and I'll never forget it. I was charged with manslaughter, but the charges were ultimately dropped due to the fact I had my child. The attacker was armed, and I had no prior convictions. I still feel absolutely dreadful about what happened, and if I could go back and change it I would. But what's done is done. I'll never forget it. My mother was with an abusive boyfriend. When I was 12 he would beat my mother and me and threaten to shoot us if we did anything against him. One night things got serious and I was trying to find a way out because I knew he was going to kill us. But it got too far by then and I had no way out. In an attempt to save myself and my mother, I shot him. He died soon after. I believe that I had done no wrong and wouldn't face consequences for my actions. After all, he was going to kill us if I didn't. This was in the state of Ohio though, and I ended up being sentenced to jail for 4 years. I still think it was unjust for that state to steal my childhood simply because I was trying to stay alive. But I have moved on since then and try to do my best to make the best of my adult life. I used to live in a particularly bad neighborhood when I was 13ish. It was around midnight when I heard our front door open. My mom worked nights and my dad was overseas, so I assumed either my mom got sent home early or we were getting burglarized. We didn't have any guns in the house or really anything someone could defend themselves with, so I hid in the closet in my room. After a few minutes I heard someone open the door to my room and start rummaging through drawers and such. I didn't really have anything of value, and there wasn't really anything in the house other than a really old TV that weighed upwards of 150 pounds. After throwing all the contents of my drawers onto the floor, I thought he'd be done and just leave, but I was wrong. Something about the closet called to him I guess, and he came over and put a hand on the doorknob. I couldn't really think of anything else to do, so I looked around for the most viable self-defense weapon I could find. The best I found was a clay bowl I'd made when in school a few years prior. When the door opened, I swung it as hard as I could. The impact was enough to daze him and shatter my shoddy bowl, but nothing else. I picked up one of the shards of the bowl and tried to use it as a sort of makeshift knife. He started backing away and tripped over something on the floor. I tried to jump on him and hold him down, but I was a scrawny kid, so it didn't really do much. He kept punching me, and in a moment of fear and adrenaline-fueled anger, I stabbed him with the shard of the bowl. I wasn't trying to kill him, but I punctured a vital artery or something, and he ended up bleeding out while I was on the phone with 911. The police took me to the station and asked a few questions, then called my mom to let her know what happened. They did want to try me for voluntary manslaughter, but dropped the charges soon after for reasons that were never disclosed to me. It really messed with my mental health, and because it was on the news and published in the local newspaper, and it ruined my social life for the next 5 years, but I've accepted it as part of my life and moved on. I was working in a prison in the UK. While doing my daily routine of AFCs in a cell, I had the door shut. I turned around sharply, and 3 inmates were standing there. I knew what was going to happen. Instantly I pushed my personal, and they rushed me. I shielded myself as best I could, while these 3 guys wailed punches and kicks on me. I started fighting back, and managed to catch one in the throat with a punch that crushed his windpipe. As he dropped gasping for air, the other 2 left. I should have tried to perform first aid, but I just stood there and watched him die. An investigation was launched, and I had to appear in court. Nothing came of it, but I still think about it sometimes. I killed 2 people, work the night shift, so I normally get home around 1:30 am, and most times my mother is asleep this time. However, I could see the living room lights were on and 2 big shadows were moving around in my house. This was extremely out of the ordinary, so I clipped my Smith & Wesson SD9V from my holster and slowly peeked in through a window. There were 2 guys in their mid-40s in my living room throwing things around and rummaging through drawers. One man had a handgun, and I figured I could wait and call the police from outside the house and keep an eye on them to make sure they don't head for the bedrooms on the 2nd floor. However, when I glanced to the couch, I saw my mother huddled with my 12-year-old niece who must have been spending the night. I knew if I waited for the cops this could go south. Before they got there, I was able to signal my mother to cover my niece's eyes and ears. I waited till the 2 men were on the far side of the room. I turned the door knob and burst into the house with my weapon, pointed at the man with the pistol. I told him in a surprisingly commanding voice to drop his weapon. Then it happened. It felt like slow motion. I saw his arms start to flick upward, and I fired 3 rounds into center mass. The 2nd man reached behind his back, and I had no choice but to put 4 rounds into him. What I can tell you, if it's not like the movies where a person dies instantly, in real life people gurgle, cry, asks for family members, ask you why you did it, and so on. Super late, but oh well. A guy attacked me at 3 am while I was walking to work. Literally barreled out of the woods and tackled me onto concrete with his belt undone. He broke 3 of my ribs and dislodged a vertebrae. Broke my jaw. I got this surge of adrenaline, and I'm so thankful for that. I tried to choke him long enough to render him unconscious, and I did. He never woke up. It still bothers me sometimes. Nearly 10 years later, I was arrested and questioned in the hospital. Uncuffed the following morning after the police obtained security camera footage. I've been asked before how I managed to hold the choke long enough to kill him. I don't know. I may have crushed his windpipe. I have no concept of how long the choke, or even the whole situation, lasted. I'm retired now, but while I was a cop, I won't get into too much detail because I don't want his family to see this or anything like that. We had a call of a guy shot. Deal with that call. He was a gang member and he lived. We had a description of the suspect vehicle which the shooter was driving. We find the car parked, nobody is in it, but we find guns and large amount of meth in the car. Find an ID and the guy is wanted for several violent crimes and his record says he is considered armed and dangerous. Use extreme caution. So we are dealing with that when we see a guy walking. It's like 3 am away from us. I drive over and spotlight him. I didn't know if it was our guy or just some dude out for drinks on his way home. He looks back at me and starts running. So I chase him on foot. He stops, turns and starts shooting at me. I remember how I was so shocked at the muzzle flash coming from his gun. So I shoot back as well as another officer who is coming from another angle. He goes down and I get to cover. We call in the cavalry and some other officers approach. I watched as they walked up and grabbed his arm to put it behind his back and it was lifeless. I remember thinking, wow, I just killed a person. He's dead. I wasn't really upset. More shocked I was not hit. For a week after that I was sure I had to have at least a grazing wound I did not feel. We did the whole internal affairs thing. I did my interview, Spoke to our police union attorney, the debt psychologist, all that. I was not upset at all, oddly. They called my then fiancée, now wife, and she was woken up, told what happened, and I was okay. She then just went back to sleep after saying, okay, good. Lol. That night I still had a ton of reports to do which sucked, so I had to sit at the PD and finish them. I went home real early in the morning and couldn't sleep. My adrenaline was pumping still. I wasn't upset. I joked with other guys and we laughed about how I was near from Matrix dodging bullets. After something like that you get calls from everyone you know, and I couldn't talk about it as it was obviously now an IA investigation. When friends outside law enforcement heard it was me in the paper, I got more and more calls. It felt good that people cared. I was not and still am not upset at all. Not one bit. I defended myself, and he made that choice. Not me. It could have been just another pose killing a young cop with a family, but this one was not, and I was glad for that. A few days later I was at Best Buy with my fiancée looking at stuff for our house we were buying, and a kid accidentally popped a balloon. That sent my heart rate sky high. I shot another guy who pulled a gun about a year later, but he lived. He went to prison, got out, and I ran into him all the time as he was a career criminal too. He showed me his bullet scar once. He said he respected me, and he deserved it. Weird. The shootings don't bother me at all. The ones that have given me PTSD are the ones where fellow cops have died. I'd seen my first dead cop a few months into my career, and it woke my young 21-year-old up to the realities of the career. But the worst PTSD incidents for me were when kids died. I'd given CPR to a baby that suffocated by his own father who slept in the bed with him and rolled over on him. I'd seen a dead child ran over by a car. Those affected me, but they were exacerbated when my child was born. That one still gets me every time I see a pink Razor scooter, as that's what she was riding. The sight of one makes me sweat, and I get angry and extremely aggressive and protective of my daughter. Ugh. Just typing this last part has sent my anxiety up. I was injured at work and had to medically retire later in my career. I found helps a ton with my PTSD. I regret anything I ever did in my career that was any type of enforcement against this great plant. Anyways, that's my story.